You are listening to SPN, the Sports Podcasting Network.
Termina o next Schwarzenegger. Gol!
Va a pegarle Ronaldinho Gaucho. Ya lo hace. Pierna derecha, directo al arco. ¡Golazo! 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 ¡Golazo!
This is Soccer Today, live on SPN Radio, your new live show about the beautiful game in all its glory, with Duane, Rollins and Kevin Laramee. MLS, EPL, La Liga, Champions League, all is fair game. Powered by the Sports Podcasting Network. Visit us at sportspodcastingnetwork.com.
Welcome to Soccer Today. I'm Duane Rollins in Toronto, still trying to wrap my head around Leicester City quarterfinalists in the Champions League.
Wow.
Yeah. Sam Lazary. We'll talk about Vardy. We'll talk about all that in our last little bit, half-hour show today. But before we do that, Jeff Rueter from 55-1 joins us on the line. He was at the 6-1 thrashing of the Atlanta United over Minnesota United on the weekend. Jeff, how are you doing?
I'm good. Thanks for having me back, guys.
No problem. I mean, look, it's one of the main talking points in North American soccer this week, obviously, is Minnesota United's historically poor start to an expansion season, allowing 11 goals in 2 games. There's just no metric you can use other than maybe to say that at least they've scored twice that is positively positive about this. But that's just to ask you that. Is there something that a Minnesota United fan can put their teeth into after these 2 games and have some level of positivity coming out of it?
Oh, absolutely. And to preface this, I did listen to your opening salvo, your eulogy that you gave for Minnesota United season yesterday on air. So I recognize the points that you guys were making. However, if you talk to the average Minnesota United fan, they do see whether it's players who haven't gotten playing time that they think deserve it, players who have gotten playing time that don't deserve it, potential moves coming down the wire, whether it's now or the summer window, and just overall style of play. And if you're looking at the attack much more than the defense, obviously, they see signs of optimism. And while there are a few people who are either new to the team, new to the sport for that matter, who don't understand it, that camp is still certainly having their day in saying that the sky is falling. But I think for the most part, the average Minnesota United fan isn't necessarily panicking so much.
Okay, fair enough. We're not there, and it's not us for us to say why. But tell us a little bit more. You mentioned that there are players that deserve not to be playing and players that maybe deserve to be playing that aren't. Can you maybe elaborate on that and give us some examples?
Sure. Well, let's see. I did take notes with yesterday because I think that you guys did a good job of kind of highlighting the darkest timeline as far as Minnesota United's season. And so I made sure to take down what you guys were talking about and maybe be able to respond to that a little bit better. So let's start with one point that you guys had mentioned is the NASL guys that they brought along weren't ready, or that they were players who just aren't of the caliber that you need in Major League Soccer. Those guys aren't playing. If you look at it, I mean, Christian Ramirez has started 1 game, and then in the other game that he played, where you're mentioning, Batman and Superman aren't on the crime scene, he scored in his 10th minute of MLS action, and he started and he was dangerous, and he showed a lot of good link-up play with Johan Venegas and Kevin Molino up top. So he's been there. He was hungry. He looked, at least from my vantage point up in the press box, like he wanted that penalty kick that Molino ended up taking. So that's something that we're kind of tracking as a minor storyline in Minnesota right now, is how do they decide? Is it going to be a rotation like they had in Columbus before the Kai Kamara, Federico Higuain explosion last season? Or is it going to be something where Kevin's always taking them? So we're trying to track that down now. But aside from that, Justin Davis started the opener, had, aside from one disastrous back pass that didn't result in a goal, what I thought was a really solid performance at left back in the opener, and he was left on the bench for the full 90 in the second game. That's a questionable decision in my book. I think that he's someone who deserves to start this third game. But aside from about a 1-minute dance of Miguel Ibarra in the season opener against Portland, no other guy with NASL experience has played. So it's not that the NASL guys aren't to the caliber and have been showing that on the field. Maybe some of them aren't, and that's totally fair, but they haven't played. And so it's really tough to gauge as far as those guys go. You look at young guys like Brent Kallman, who's one of the NASL guys, like Joe Greenspan, center back, used to be with Colorado, Colin Martin, who was a DC United homegrown player. They haven't seen the field at all. And so a lot of this youth movement that could be going on if you're a struggling team to try to see what you have for the future, they aren't seeing the field yet. And it's totally acceptable why they aren't, and why I think it's terribly overreactionary to be saying that they're the worst team in MLS history after 2 games, because it's only 2 games. And through 2 games, the Seattle Sounders lost both. Meanwhile, last season, the year before, or that same opening 2 games, the Houston Dynamo kicked off 2016 with a 3-3 draw and then ended up beating FC Dallas 5-0 in their second game. And we saw how it ended up for both of those teams. So I think it's overly reactionary to be looking and saying, we told you so with Minnesota, or saying Atlanta United truly is an MLS Cup contender after what they did with Minnesota.
Yeah, you're right. It is. You a little bit of hot takes to go with my hot cakes. But when you're looking at Minnesota, you mentioned a name that I liked very much and was instrumental in Minnesota's first goal of their history, Yohan Venegas. Maybe one of the few positive points on the pitch for the last 2 weeks. Let's talk about how the attack, at some moments, even against Atlanta, they had some moments where you see potential, where you see what they're trying to do. Can you explain what did you like in this a few moments in the last 2 games where their offense looked good?
Well, at this point, Kevin, the 2 games that they've played so far, they've lined up as the kind of traditional 4-2-3-1 that Heath ran out in Orlando. But the moments that they've looked best have actually been when they look more like a 4-4-2. And those will be moments when you have Christian as a pure striker, you have Yohan as a second striker who's able to just kind of float sideline to sideline in the attacking third wherever he sees fit and create his own chances. Molino is cutting in from the right, and ultimately somebody is playing on the left wing. And they ended up playing Mohamed Saeed as something of a center mid / left winger, which is something Saeed is far from being a winger. So that was a disastrous decision as well in my book. But the moments that they've looked best are when Yohan has been able to be that creative spark plug that he is with the Ticos in international play. And certainly wasn't something that we saw when he was in Montreal. And so give him that freedom. That freedom is only allowed to him when Christian's on the field, because then he doesn't have to stay parked on the edge of the box like a striker or like a target forward, and Christian can do that job and then do the track backs as needed. But Yohan really gets the space to roam free. And then you have 2 more true attackers. If this team only has 3 attackers on the field at any time, which has been the case at least for the opening 70 minutes of both matches, it's so easy to double team Molino and then get your best true defender on Venegas and then get a stronger defender physically on Ramirez, and you neutralize all 3 of them. But if you have that 4th one, whether it's Bashkim Kadri, Josh Gatt, Miguel Ibarra, Abu Danladi, if you can get one of those guys on the field as well, I think that you could really see multiple goals coming in for Minnesota United. Maybe not against a defense as stout as Colorado historically, but certainly that next match against New England.
Let's go back to Batman and Superman for a second, Jeff. Yes, might have been critical, and it's not necessarily fair considering the amount of times played by either or. What's interesting, though, is as much as a big comeback story was for both of them to come back to the team, they cannot be the center focus of this team. Do you think that those 2 players, in the outside perspective, we're not in Minnesota, but they're not the 2 key players, if I'm not mistaken, with Minnesota, correct?
No, you're absolutely right. Christian is more so because he is a player who can score goals, from a number of settings. You saw the goal that he scored against Portland. And he settled it poorly with his left foot. It bounced. He was trying to settle it with his foot. It bounced up to like his shin, and he was still able to take the bounce that it had and then put it behind a really good reactionary goalkeeper in Jake Gleason. So Christian is someone I still think this year will get double-digit goals. I've gone on record on about half a dozen different radio shows and podcasts with that, and I still believe that's the case. But with Miguel, I mean, he's creative. He's certainly a spark plug, but he's not a player that you're going to see goals and assists every single week. And I don't know if this was with you two that I was talking about this, but that's never going to be his strength in Major League Soccer. He's a player who's a complete player if you're looking as far as being able to create chances for other players, as well as best neutralize the opposing winger and fullback of the other side. But he's not someone who's going to be cutting in to make the fantastic shot. So it's tough to assess how they're doing. For Miguel, obviously, it's tough to assess because he's had 3 minutes of MLS action. But until the attack is able to actually build momentum and get chances in the box, you're not going to really be able to see what Christian's capable of, unfortunately.
All right, Jeff, I just fired Adrian Heath, and I've just appointed you the manager. So congratulations. What I'm going to do?
That's a mistake, but thank you. Okay.
How would you fix the back line? That's got to be the most confounding issue right now, is particularly in the center where it doesn't look like the talent's there. Is there a fix? Is there something? I don't know, simple is the wrong way to put it, but is there something concrete that you can do that to immediately get some results in your mind?
Sure, Duane. I mean, you can absolutely do it with the talent that's on the roster. It's not going to be Colorado's defense was always last season kind of the sum bigger than the parts. It's not going to sound the sexiest back line, but you're putting Justin Davis back at left back, who's a player who's played left back his entire career, which is much more experience playing the position than you can say about Jermaine Taylor. And fair enough. I think Jermaine Taylor is a solid piece to have on the bench as something of a third or a fourth center back, but he's not a starting fullback, and that's fine. It's just like Mohamed Saeed isn't a starting left winger. It doesn't mean he's a bad player. It just means that's not the position for him. So you've got Davis at left back. I think he's solid. I think that he is at least a capable starter, if not a dependable starter. You keep Calvo, who is an incredibly talented center back. He's the one player who's probably been marred most by this opening start because he is very talented. He's strong, he's aggressive, he's creative, and he's a good tackler, and he's good with his positioning. Even aside from one or two moments in this last Atlanta game, he hasn't been the culprit on these goals. And so keep him at that point because he has been the best defender through 2 games. Then you've got, I would say, Brent Coleman, who played at an NASL Best 11 level last year at right center back alongside Calvo. And that's a lot of hustle between Calvo and Coleman. They both have tireless motors. They're both creative. They're both good with the ball at their feet. They're good distributors. And that's one thing that we've seen right now is that Vadim Demidov, the captain who's been at right center back the first 2 matches, his distribution has just been abysmal. And his positioning, because of that, and because I think it's so shaky and he's immediately having to pass, see that it's a turnover and quickly get ready for defense, he's caught unaware. And then at right back, Jerome Tisson, who just came in, touchdown on Thursday morning, I believe, in Minnesota after coming from Switzerland. And so he was very rusty, and he was probably jet lagged the entire game, and it showed. And a couple of key decisions that he made. I think that 4 can be your stable backline at least until you get to the summer transfer window, and then you move Demidov to what I think is a better role for him at defensive midfield, alongside Rasmus Schuler. Demidov is a player who, I mean, his mobility has decreased as it always does for a player over 30, but he still can be a smart player. And I think if you let him be more of like a frontline sweeper, who's able to go side to side and doesn't have to stay marked with the Emil Assads, the Miguel Almirons, who are playing on the left side of the attack, and he can just kind of take whoever's central attacking midfield and neutralize them, kind of like I'm trying to think of a good example of this, a less mobile Ozzy Alonso, I guess. I think he could have real success in that position. So I'm making it something of a 4-4-2 instead of a 4-2-3-1 if I'm fatefully made the manager of Minnesota United.
All right. Now you're the manager. All right. That's all well and good. But I want to talk about the one thing that has been a little bit forgotten with those 2 huge defeats is the opposition. Minnesota have arguably faced 2 of maybe the top 5 teams in the league right now. Atlanta showed great potential in their first game against the Red Bulls, which may be the best team in the league, the Red Bulls. So they were close to them. And then they dominated Minnesota in a big fashion. Portland, the first game, Portland may be the best team in the Western Conference right now with the Houston Dynamo and FC Dallas, three teams that, especially the first two that I mentioned, are rolling on all cylinders right now. So Minnesota faced two great teams. Now they're facing Colorado, a good team, a team that has a lot of potential, but not necessarily have the offensive power of their first two teams that they have faced. What do you expect now versus Colorado?
It's tough, Kevin, because the first two games, like you said, they've been against immense competition. And if nothing else, hungry competition with an attacking focus. I think the opta expected goals, which is, I mean, it's say what you will about metrics, but the expected goals of the Atlanta-Minnesota game was 2.18, I believe, something in that realm for Atlanta, and 1.7 for Minnesota. So the scoreline, I mean, it was just clinical finishing by Atlanta. You don't have an Almiron, you don't have a Joseph Martinez, and you certainly don't have a Hector Villalba on Colorado. You've got a very capable attacker in Shelson Gashi, who I still think is one of the most underrated players in MLS. But Kevin Doyle hasn't been a great goal scorer since he's joined the league. Dominique Badji is incredibly streaky. So I think that in a weird way, this defensive-based Colorado team is the perfect cure-all for what's going on with Minnesota, because it gives them a chance to, okay, the attack will really need to step up their game and make sure they're clinical and they're tight and they're taking their chances when they get them. But the defense is going to need to be stabilized. And I think that it's an attack that hopefully they'll be able to neutralize. If they lose this game 7-1 and continue the streak of increasing one more goal allowed in every single game, every reason to panic. You know, that's entirely fair. But I think in this game, with two teams that have struggled to score goals, as Colorado has won through two games right now, if they can keep this one to 2-2, that's a huge victory, especially on the road at Dick's Sporting Good. 2-2 would be an awesome result, but it would also show that Colorado scored two goals after scoring one in their opening 180 minutes. So there's still some questions there, and I think that's a fair amount of leeway for Minnesota. But if you can walk out of Colorado and get a result against a Shield contending team last year, I think that's a major confidence boost for Minnesota as they're heading into their next few matches.
If Colorado scores 7, then I don't even know where to go with that.
Exactly. Yeah.
They might not score 7 until June. Anyway, Jeff, let's focus a bit more on the positive. It did seem like that a lot of people were in that. There were a lot of people in the stadium, even though it was 19 Fahrenheit, whatever that works out into our language up here, minus whatever. Mm-hmm. Tell me what the mood was at the start of that game to the best of your ability, appreciating you in the press box, and kind of what your take on what the mood was at the conclusion of it.
You know, I mean, first off, obviously the mood got a little bit worse after the 6th goal went in. But if you're looking at it, Minnesota has a weird type of sports fan in our culture, where there were a lot of fans who were hoping it would be a snowstorm. When we were talking about this at the August launch, you know, and you'd be sitting at the bar and you'd be like, I just hope that there's snow and it's terribly cold and it's a blizzard, because it's going to show that Minnesota is here to stay, and it's going to be a very uniquely Minnesotan opener. And to those fans, they got exactly what they were looking for. Like you said, 19 degrees Fahrenheit. I think that's what, -5 centigrade, something like that. Snow that started an hour before kickoff and then stopped about 2 hours after kickoff. So it was specifically during the window of the game. Fans loved it. There were 35,000 fans announced. I think that probably as far as actual went through the gates, those were tickets purchased or distributed. I think through the gates is probably closer to 29,000, 30,000. But the majority of those guys and gals stood the entire match. Not just the Dark Clouds and True North Elite and the supporters, but all of the fans in the stadium were standing and chanting Minnesota and MNUFC, and then letting the supporter section do their thing for the more nuanced chants. And this is a state that hasn't had a top flight soccer team since the Kicks in the early 80s. And it was incredibly encouraging to see. And I hope, I mean, most of the fans, I'd say 90%, stayed to the final whistle too, weren't just drifting once it became 2-0, 3-0 in the first half. So I'm hoping that you're going to be able to see 20,000 or more on April 1st against Real Salt Lake. But it was an incredible experience just for someone who's been a part of the sport and covered the sport, and it was incredibly encouraging, and just kind of humbling, honestly, to see that Major League Soccer is at least immediately going to stick in Minnesota, and I think for the long term as well.
-7 on the Celsius conversion, by the way, according to my iPhone.
There you go.
And I'm sure there was a wind chill there, which is something those of us that live in northern climates know all too well what wind chill means. At any rate, Jeff, give me your take on what the reaction was in the local media the day after. Now, even in a place where they're accepting of soccer, you're going to find the dinosaurs out there still. Was there some negativity that sort of came out and was over the top, or was it a pretty balanced take the next day in the local media?
Pretty balanced, Duane. I mean, I would say that for the most part, a lot of people, I mean, yes, you want to talk about how did they let in 6 goals. I think that there was more pushback that the club in any of their like post-match releases, they didn't even mention the score line. It was something that was really suspect and really strange. It was all 35,000, brave the elements. It was a tough game. Atlanta ended up winning it. But in just very speaking in general terms, but they never actually highlighted 6-1, which was really bizarre. But for the most part, like you said, there are a couple of dinosaurs or a couple of newcomers to soccer who would just be like, oh, there were goals, which is more than I expected. Ha ha. But I mean, for the most part, I think everyone was like, this was an iconic game through and through. And I think that's the term I would definitely use to describe it. It was truly iconic. It's the coldest game in MLS history, the second game in MLS history to use an orange ball. And, the team has a lot of work to do. I mean, I will sit here and try to be as level-headed about the team's performance and say that they just need more time. They need more reps. Most of these players weren't signed until December or January, so they're still getting used to each other and getting used to Heath's system. It's going to take time, especially over the first 2 months. There are going to be some lopsided results, or there are going to be some plays that would be no-brainers. But I mean, even today, we saw Jamie Vardy sky a golden opportunity, so everyone has a bad game. So it's going to be an interesting first couple of months, but I guess my plea to you too, treat them like every other team. Don't look at them as being it's them or Atlanta. Look what Atlanta's doing, so Minnesota United is getting clobbered, because it's going to look incredibly knee-jerk. And if you look at it, and you would write about it the same way as any Chicago Fire team, if you would say that Chicago Fire let in these goals and they're the worst team of all time, say it about Minnesota, totally fine. But if you were to switch the team names and you were going to change that and change how you treat them, I would pump the brakes a little bit on the article. That would be my only take.
Pump the brakes. One of my favorite phrases, Jeff. I don't think the Twins are going to be very good this year, so you might have a pretty open market and opportunity there. So we'll see. I'm a baseball fan, so we'll leave that well enough alone. Jeff, anything going on 651 you want to say, want to promote before we say goodbye?
Yep, I'm going to be going through the lineup that I kind of started to tease at in an article that comes up tomorrow. Read Alex Schieffer-Decker's take called Please Panic Responsibly. As far as looking at the other side of the coin right now, I think Alex did a really good job of that. New episode of the 251 podcast came out, and as always, check for my stuff on MLSsoccer.com too.
Cool. Thanks again, Jeff.
Yep. Cheers, guys.
You are listening to Soccer Today, live on SPN Radio. Visit sportspodcastingnetwork.com for more.
In my defense, Kevin, I didn't say they were the worst team in the last
No, we asked the question. Like, there was an interrogation point, right? Like, just look at the title of the show. There's a question mark at the end.
Yes, I what I said, to be clear, to put it on the record, is that
Could be.
They might be that they have the potential to be. And to answer Jeff's question there, if the Chicago Fire lost 11-2 on aggregate in its first 2 games of the season, yeah, I'd be asking similar questions. And the other thing I did say,
Duane, are you there? Yeah, we lost Duane, but like Duane was saying,
similar to me, but at any rate.
You just got back. We lost you for all of that you just said. But what were you saying?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I just said they remind me of TFC in the early days, and we'll leave it at that for now. Is what I was saying. And if you're a Minnesota fan, you should probably look at that history and learn it, because you don't want the team to make the same kind of mistakes as consistently as TFC did if you want this rebuild to change fast. Chivas USA were the Western Conference regular season champions 3 years after they finished with 19 points. You can turn things around quickly in this league, Kevin.
Yes, absolutely. Let's talk about Duane. You mentioned errors being repeated. Samir Nasri today, again, had a lot of drama in his soccer life, and it happened against Leicester. A historical night in Leicester as well. Tonight in the Champions League, Leicester is moving on to the quarterfinals after eliminating Sevilla 3-2 on aggregate.
Yeah, I'm not gonna lie. I'm beginning to really dislike Leicester. They don't play a style that I find appealing, and they have a lot of little kind of Vardy is how you may we'll get the bingo card here. We did a hockey analogy, since we had a Minnesota guest on here. Minnesota fans listening will know hockey too. He reminds us of Sean Avery. Jamie Vardy does.
That's what he does. It's exactly the same. Vardy was playing Avery, and Nasri was playing Marte Brodeur. So Avery was trying to block. It's amazing the way that Jamie Vardy gets underneath your skin, and he knew exactly what he's doing. He looked, it was Nasri. He's like, yeah, I got this. He probably nudged his friend next to him. Look, I'm gonna get underneath his skin, and he's gonna get sent off. He's already on a yellow.
Yeah, and look, I've followed Samir Nasri's career for a long time. You would have, because you watched the French team closely too. We both know him pretty well, and we know that's just who he is. That little move with his head is something that I've seen that player do 4 or 5 times in his career, and he doesn't seem to learn that he can't do it. And I don't understand that. He has a temper that has got himself in a lot of trouble. It got himself basically kicked off the French national team at a time when his play probably deserved to have him on there before the last World Cup. And, it's got him basically moved down to the fact that he's playing in Sevilla now rather than for one of the bigger clubs. That might have been, and I'm not saying Sevilla is not a big club in its own right, but they're not amongst the elite in Europe, right? And you can argue whether City is or not. I'm not going to get into that right now, but certainly he's getting paid more there. So this has hurt his career, his temper and his temperament. That said, he still has a lot to give, and when he's out there and playing well and playing within himself, he really does himself a disservice, because he is a good player, but this is a player that just can't keep his head together. And once that card happened, despite the fact Sevilla did earn the penalty after that, and maybe we'll talk about that in a second, it really kind of was over at that point. And look, I guess good for Leicester for getting it done. I have trouble being too excited for a team that clearly completely laid down, laid tools, as some people say, for the last 3 months to get rid of their manager. I don't have a lot of respect for that, despite what they did last year.
Yeah, no, there's that aspect. But if you look at just the game, especially Schmeichel, the goalkeeper for Leicester. Schmeichel, I was close. Schmeichel. Like his save and the rest of the game, he played a very solid game. It was his night. But the penalty by Nzazi, one of the worst penalties I've ever seen. It reminds me of Javinko a few weeks ago, but even worse. Telegraphed. You knew exactly where it was going with it, and there was no pace, no speed in the run up to the ball, no pace when he went through the ball. He basically didn't even go through the ball. He just kind of like side-footed it, and he totally ruined the big chance they had to tie it up to force extra time for Sevilla. Late in the game, you get a penalty like this. First of all, they had an opportunity. Great save by Schmeichel once again, and they got the penalty call on that same play. They flubbed their chance, and Leicester took advantage of it. And then they took advantage of the man up they had and basically ran down the clock.
Yeah, well, no, look, they're from really Sevilla to me lost this tie in the first game at home when they completely dominated Leicester.
Yeah,
so
and
they
let
dominated possession tonight.
Late goal. Sorry, but it was a late goal by Leicester just to score one, but that gave them the chance to win tonight. You're absolutely right.
Yeah, and they missed a penalty. They missed 2 penalties of the tie total. So if you do that, you're going to have trouble winning anything. But nonetheless, they should have really blown them out of the market on the first game, the game in Spain, but they didn't do it. And if you leave a team into it, they got there by merit. Leicester they play their style very well. They're not an attractive style for me anyway. I don't find it appealing. I know others do. The narrative, I think, allows a lot of people to overlook some of the weaknesses in how they play, but nonetheless, here we are. The penalty, just to go on that real quickly, I find it interesting to watch players nowadays, and this is a general broad sweeping statement that maybe we might explore on when the news slows down. They tend to get cute with the penalties nowadays, and I just don't understand why people just don't blast them in the top corners anymore. Maybe there's a statistical reason why not. But
just blast it anywhere. Just hit it hard. Like, hit it hard down the middle. What do you want a goalkeeper to do? Stop it with his foot? He can't. Doesn't have power behind him when he's actually diving on another direction. Just put it hard. Like, whatever happened to just shooting it like with some velocity towards the net?
Yeah, he side-footed. He tried to do a push penalty, basically. Like, this is not to compare myself to any professional player ever, but back in the very times that I've taken a penalty in my life, I have done that. I have tried to push it off of the bar on the near side, on the short side of the keeper, because I'm trying to get the keeper. Most keepers dive to the right, so you try and push it left. That's the theory behind it. But you got to hit it perfect if you're going to have a chance. The reason I did that, Kevin, is because I don't have the power to blast it to someone. They do.
And not just that, when you side foot it like this and you open up your hip, with your planting feet just before you hit it, you lose all momentum and all power. So you need that precision. And with the moment, the intensity, the nerves, the chaos, the pressure that comes at that exact moment that you need to score the goal to tie it up, you leave yourself in an area where you're not going to have easily a lot of power behind your kick, because that's the technique you use to get to the ball. You leave the margin of error to be quite big. And that's what happened. He put it in the perfect spot for the goalkeeper to save it, and he saved it no difficulty.
Yeah, exactly. Looking ahead, and we have to wrap quick today, so we'll maybe leave it after this. But looking ahead to what Leicester will get in the next round, of course, we have 2 games in the docket tomorrow, including the English club Manchester City, which is the game I'll be watching very closely, and Atletico Madrid as well, trying to wrap up their tie. We have a guest booked for Thursday that is going to talk particularly about the Atleti season and La Liga and sort of the Champions League in whole. But putting that aside, we were talking off air, Kevin and I, who we think Leicester will want to draw in the next round. And I'll actually go a little outside what most people think. I think what Leicester wants to draw is they want to draw a team that plays similar to Sevilla or Manchester City. I think City would be the team they ideally would like to draw, because they've had their number over the past little while. And I think that the second team they might want to draw, believe it or not, is Barcelona. And the reason I'll say that is because they play that style where they're going to try and have so much possession. Obviously, they've got a player in Messi and Neymar that are otherworldly that Sevilla can't match. So it's not that it would be easy. But I think stylistically, they're set up and they have a great deal of ability. You saw it again, how they've handled City in the last 3 or 4 times they played them, how they handled Liverpool recently as well, a team that likes to sort of get on the front foot and get have the ball and try and be creative. The Leicester just does very well against those teams. I think Leicester would do very poorly against a team like Juve or a team like Bayern Munich, which I think would be their nightmare draw. But I do think that they would have a very outside chance of replicating Barcelona, or beating Barcelona if they were to replicating PSG's result in the first leg, is what I was trying to say, if they were to get that draw, because there are some defensive liabilities on the counter that they could expose with Barca. Now, this problem there would be, I think Barca might be a little more clinical than what we thought Sevilla was.
True, but with Shakespeare as a manager of Leicester now, you're not going to get Claudio Ranieri trying to make his team that was not playing cute, trying to make them cuter so they're more appealing, and them losing. No, it's going to be 11 men behind the ball and jump in, slide, stop the shots at all costs. That's what we'll see from Leicester if they draw a Barcelona. But that is interesting to see if, it's the one and only chance Leicester has in the next 2 years. Like, they're not going to win the league or finish top 4 or 5 or 5th for that matter for Europe next season. Like, that's not going to happen. The only way they'll play in Europe again is if they win the Champions League, or the only time they can make a statement is go far and as far as they can. And that's what they're doing now. So whoever they face, it's going to be a challenge, and they're all in because that's the only chance. Like, player like Wes Morgan, who scored the goal today, who grew up in the different ranks of English football with this team. He played lower division, came with Leicester up, and now he played in the Champions League and is going to the quarterfinals. Those are moments they never expected, and they shouldn't expect them in the future. So they have to use and leave everything they have on the pitch and to find a way to win. And that's kind of how they treated this game. And Shakespeare, as a coach, gave them belief what they lost this season. So it's, who knows? Even if they get a Real Madrid or something, it might be very difficult. I agree. And the 1 or 2 chance Madrid they will bury it compared to a Sevilla who missed a few chances. So you have that.
Yeah, you're not going to get an easy touch in the quarterfinals. I mean, if you're a Leicester fan, maybe you want to get that glory draw at this point. They haven't really had it. They've been pretty lucky in the draws in terms of having beatable teams. But at the same time, maybe having a Real Madrid come in to play a competitive fixture would be something that would be a memory you'd take forever. So they might at this point be looking for that. I maintain that Bayern Munich would be their nightmare draw. I think that they're just so clinical in how they play, and they're able to mask them or to match them physically as well, I think. So that would be hard for them. Atletico Madrid would be tough for them too, but it just wouldn't look ugly because Atleti would just win 1-0. At any rate, Kevin, we have a quick turnaround for tomorrow's show. We had to do because Kevin was working days for the start of this week, but D2 Wednesdays will start tomorrow. We have Steven Sandor booked to preview the Eddie season a little bit there. Maybe we'll talk a little bit more about his perspective on the early weeks of MLS as well. And, of course, tonight's CONCACAF Champions League game between Tigres and the Vancouver Whitecaps, which you can now watch on TSN. So we encourage you to all watch that. Kevin and I will be watching that after I go have my quick little run at the gym. I'm going to rush back here and grab myself a Diet Pepsi and enjoy watching the CCL action. But until that time, as always, Kevin, I'm going to let you say goodbye.
A very interesting matchup. Tigres might be one of the best Mexican teams in history, according to Tom Marshall, which you can listen to in the latest edition of Extra Time Radio on MLSsoccer.com. By the way, great interview, Tom Marshall, friend of the show. And until next time here on Soccer Today for Duane Rollins, I am Kevin Laramee. You can follow Duane on Twitter at 24th Minute and myself, Kevin Laramee, at Kev Laramee. Until tomorrow, 10 a.m., have a great soccer. You were listening to SPN, the Sports Podcasting Network. Visit us, sportspodcastingnetwork.com.